Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to be talking about some of the best teams that missed the four-team college football playoff. Of course we know the four-team playoff, RIP, it is no longer a thing starting in 2024, but because we only had four teams make the playoff, there were several teams that only had one loss, maybe two losses, that were really good that unfortunately missed out. And the first team we're going to be talking about is the 2015 Ohio State Buckeyes. Oh my goodness, we remember Ohio State, JT Barrett, Zeke Elliott, Joey Bosa, that defense in 2014, the run that they went on after the loss to Virginia Tech. They win the national title. And then in 2015, they returned basically everyone. But because JT Barrett gets injured, Cardale Jones comes in. They want to give both QBs a chance in 2015. What they should have done is left Braxton Miller at QB. Remember, he had to transition to becoming a receiver. And you can see their 2015 regular season, they start off really lackadaisical. There was just something off about this team. Urban Meyer, for as good of a coach as he was, the quarterback was always a problem. You know, Cardale Jones, JT Barrett, he couldn't pick one. Whenever you rotate guys, it's just never a good thing. And then that home loss to Michigan State, starting like their third string quarterback in the rain, and Ezekiel Elliott was like injured or he was in the hospital the week before. They end up losing 17-14. The kicker drills like a 45-yard field goal in the rain, and they end up crushing Michigan on the road, beating Notre Dame in a New Year's Six Bowl and only losing one game. It's funny, I was putting this video together and Ezekiel Elliott had like 28 carries. That was the final game for Zeke. Like nowadays, there's no way a running back who's about to enter the draft and be a first round pick would play in a meaningless New Year's Six Bowl. But it was just a different time. Even going back to 2015, Zeke Elliott, right before going to the draft, has 28 carries against Notre Dame and 4 touchdowns. But yeah, what could have been with that 2015 team, they just needed to pick a quarterback. But Ohio State, they were loaded. But I will say they deserve to miss the playoff. It's just like you lose to Michigan State at home with their like fourth string quarterback in the rain, and they were lackadaisical throughout the regular season. They certainly had the talent to win the national title, go back to back. It just didn't happen. The next best team that missed the playoff, it is 2014 TCU. And you really do have to feel bad for 2014 TCU because of what transpired towards the end of the season. The fact that the Big 12 had no conference championship game, they had no chance at that extra data point. They destroyed Iowa State in the final week, and then they dropped from number 3 all the way to number 6 because Ohio State crushed Wisconsin. And then to add insult to injury, the number 4 seed that jumped them, Ohio State, ended up winning the national title. So it made the committee's move kind of justified because the Buckeyes won the national title. In retrospect, what really should have happened is they should have let both TCU and Ohio State in and kicked out Florida State, but there was no way that was happening because Florida State was the defending national champion at the time and they were undefeated, but they had a lot of close games, and then they got destroyed by Oregon and Marcus Mariota in the Rose Bowl in the first college football playoff semifinal game. But this team with Boykin at quarterback, they were so good, man. Sure, they had kind of a shaky defense. Remember Gary Patterson? It would have been really fun to see this team in the playoff. And imagine TCU if they would have made the playoff in 2014 and they made the national championship game back a few years ago. They got crushed by Georgia, but that would have been interesting if TCU would have had 2 playoff appearances. Either way, that's a tough miss. They were a really solid team, and they became kind of irrelevant because Ohio State ended up winning the national title. Moving on to the next best team that missed the playoff, it is 2023 Georgia. Now, this just happened. Georgia coming off back-to-back national titles. I mean, just look at some of these wins. Sure, the game at Auburn was shaky. They destroyed Kentucky. You know, you look at the Florida game, the rivalry game. Missouri, they easily handle them. Ole Miss, we know how Ole Miss finished the season, all the hype that they have. Well, this Georgia team beat Ole Miss 52-17. It was not close. They crush Tennessee on the road, and then they suffer that extremely close loss to Alabama, their only loss coming off back-to-back national titles, and they miss the playoff because of one 3-point loss in the SEC championship. Everybody that watched college football last year knows that Georgia, and by the way, probably Ohio State, but I'm not going to get into that argument, but at least Georgia was one of the 4 best teams and should have been in the playoff. And you can say, well, Florida State, they didn't play anyone. If Florida State would have played all their players, they still would have gotten crushed. It was 63-3. Florida State without Jordan Travis was not a very good team. That Georgia team, though, Carson Beck was playing really well, especially towards the end of the year. We know how talented and how deep these Georgia teams are, these Kirby Smart coach teams are on defense. And the offense with the running back duo, they were coming along as well. Brock Bowers suffers the injury, comes back. And this Georgia team, it's unfortunate. The 14, they definitely needed the 12-team playoff this year, Georgia, because they would have a real shot at winning the national title. The next best team that missed the playoff, it is 2016 Oklahoma. And a lot of you probably don't even remember this team because they started the year 1-2. They had kind of a weird neutral site game at NRG Stadium week 1 against Houston. This is when Houston was routinely ranked. It was kind of an interesting game there. It was kind of like a home game for Houston because the game was in Houston, Texas, but it wasn't at their home stadium. But they lose that game, and then they lose the game that no one remembers because everyone remembers the Baker Mayfield flag plant in Ohio Stadium. Well, the year before, Ohio State went to Oklahoma. It was a game on Fox at night. It was really weird. It had like a 30-minute lightning delay or something, and Ohio State crushed Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma, and that put Oklahoma pretty much irrelevant throughout the entire year because they were 1-2. They were already knocked out of the playoff 3 games into the season, but they come back, they win a bunch of games. They had that crazy game with Texas Tech. You could say, obviously, Oklahoma being a Big 12 team, in the year 2016, they played very little defense. That is what it is. But looking towards the end of the season, they go on the road in a snow game at West Virginia. This is when they had Samaje Perine, Joe Mixon, Baker, Dede Westbrook, Mark Andrews, and then they beat Auburn. And that score in that Auburn game, that was the Sugar Bowl. That doesn't justify. They whooped Auburn in that game. That game could have been 41-7. That was not a competitive game. I mean, Oklahoma just had way more talent. In my opinion, 2016 Oklahoma, they were one of the 4 best teams for sure. I'm not saying they should have made the playoff, but if you look at them throughout the entire season, they were a really good football team, and unfortunately, they just became irrelevant because they started 1-2. It's interesting to look back on teams like that. The next team, this is a very unique situation. So 2019 Alabama, this was one of the Tua teams. They ended up not even making a New Year's Six Bowl. They faced Michigan in the Citrus Bowl. That was a game that Tua, I believe, opted out of, or he was injured or something, and Mac Jones started. And they ended up beating Michigan in that game. But this team, like you look at the start of their season, it's a typical Alabama begin to the season. They're just crushing everyone, even good teams they're crushing. They destroy Texas A&M on the road. They crush Tennessee. They crush Arkansas 48-7. And then they play in that crazy game. It was a home game, 3:30 CBS game against Joe Burrow and one of the greatest teams ever. That LSU team with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they lose by 5 points, and then they come back and they win 2 games easily, and then they lose on the road at Auburn in a rivalry game when Auburn, they were really good that year, 48-45, so they lost 2 games by a combined 8 points. One of them was against one of the greatest college football teams ever, and they missed a New Year's Six Bowl too. This was a really good team. I know you could say, well, they lost at Auburn. They allowed too many points. The defense wasn't great. But this was a really good Alabama team with Tua. Tua was an unbelievable college quarterback. They had crazy receivers. Jerry Jeudy that year. I believe he was a junior that year. Devontae Smith, I'm not sure if Jalen Waddle was on the 20. Oh, yeah, he had to have been because I remember him on 20. So they had crazy receivers, man. And they're just kind of like a forgotten team, 2019 Alabama, because you look at the end of the season and they only made the Citrus Bowl. It is pretty crazy, but guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.